Today we explore a moment in human history when the world hung on a knife edge. We travel back over 2,000 years to a city built on mud, blood, and marble. Rome, but not the Rome of the emperors you see in movies. Not yet. We are looking at the Roman Republic. For nearly 500 years, the Romans hated the very idea of a king. They had a system of checks and balances, a senate filled with wealthy, proud elders who believed that no single man should ever rule supreme. Liberty to a Roman meant that power must always be shared, always rotated, always checked. And for centuries, that system worked. It conquered the Mediterranean. But wealth changes things. Enormous wealth poured into the city, gold from Greece, slaves from Carthage, grain from Egypt. And with that wealth came a toxic poison, corruption by the first century. Before the Common Era, the Republic was fracturing. The rich were getting unimaginably rich, buying up all the land. The poor, the ordinary citizens who fought Rome's wars, returned home to find themselves homeless, jobless, and forgotten. The streets of Rome were alive with tension. Riots were common. Political assassinations were becoming a regular tool of debate. The system was breaking. It was an empire in search of a master. It was a stage waiting for an actor grand enough to command it, and into this collapsing world, a boy was born. His family was ancient, aristocratic, and proud. They claimed they were descended from Venus, the goddess of love. But they were also politically sidelined and relatively poor. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. As a young man, no one would have looked at him and predicted he would conquer the known world. He was known for being a bit of a dandy. He spent too much money on clothes. He combed his thinning hair forward to hide his baldness. He had a soft, high-pitched speaking voice, but behind that elegant, relaxed exterior was a mind of pure, focused steel, a man possessed by a terrifying, burning ambition. There is a story that when Caesar was a young man, traveling across the Aegean Sea, he was captured by Cilician pirates. Most people would be terrified. They would weep, pray, and beg. Not Caesar. When the pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, Caesar laughed in their faces. He told them they clearly didn't know who they had captured, and insisted they demand 50 talents instead. For 38 days he held captive by these ruthless cutthroats, but he didn't act like a prisoner. He acted like their master. He wrote poems and speeches and forced the pirates to listen to them. If they didn't appreciate his writing, he called them illiterate savages to their faces. He joined in their games, and whenever he wanted to sleep, he would send a servant to tell the pirates to be quiet. He told them, with a smile on his face, that once he was free, he would return and crucify every single one of them. The pirates laughed. They thought he was a charming, eccentric, crazy young man. The ransom was paid, Caesar was released, and the very first thing he did was raise a private fleet, track down the pirates, capture them, and fulfill his promise. Every single one of them was crucified. That was the man Rome was about to deal with. Charming, polite, perfectly dressed, and absolutely relentless. As Caesar entered Roman politics, he realized a fundamental truth about the Republic. You could not win by playing by the old rules. The Senate was controlled by a small group of rigid, traditionalist elites who blocked any kind of reform. If Caesar wanted to rise, he needed leverage, he needed allies, and so he looked around Rome and spotted two men who had exactly what he lacked. The first was Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus was, without exaggeration, the richest man in Roman history. He had made his fortune through real estate and by running Rome's only firefighting brigade. When a building caught fire, Crassus would show up with his team of slaves and refuse to put out the fire until the owner sold him the building for a fraction of its worth. If they refused, he let it burn. He was greedy, ambitious, and desperately wanted military glory to match his wealth. The second man was Pompey. Pompey was known as the Great. He was Rome's most celebrated general. He had cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, conquered the East, and expanded Rome's borders massively. The soldiers adored him, but the Senate feared him and was refusing to grant his veterans the land they had been promised. Pompey was furious, but politically isolated. Caesar looked at these two men, men who actually hated each other and saw an opportunity. He approached them in secret. He used his incredible charm and intellect to bridge the gap between them. He proposed an alliance. Imagine it like a secret pact, a three-headed monster. History calls it the first triumvirate. Crassus would provide the bottomless wealth. Pompey would provide the military muscle and the loyalty of the veterans. And Caesar would provide the political brains and the sheer, unstoppable will. Together, they realized that nothing could happen in the Roman Republic without their approval. They completely bypassed the Senate to cement the alliance. Caesar did something that tells you everything about the brutal nature of Roman politics. He gave his beloved daughter Julia in marriage to Pompey. Despite the massive age gap, it turned out to be a genuine love match. With this backing, Caesar was elected to Rome's highest office, consul. His year as consul was chaotic, aggressive, and wild. If the Senate tried to block his laws, Caesar's thugs would pour buckets of feces over his co-consul's head. He terrorized his political enemies. He passed laws giving land to the poor and to Pompey's veterans. But Caesar knew that political office only lasts for 1 year. And the moment his year was up, his enemies in the Senate were going to arrest him, put him on trial, and destroy him. He needed an escape hatch. He needed a job that would keep him safe from prosecution, give him an army, and give him the one thing he still lacked, compared to Pompey, legendary military glory. So, he secured a 5-year appointment as the governor of Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium. He left Rome behind, rode north into the wild, untamed forests, and began a campaign that would change the map of Europe forever. For nearly a decade, Caesar waged a brutal, brilliant war in Gaul. Before Caesar arrived, the Romans viewed the Gallic tribes as terrifying, giant barbarians who had once sacked Rome centuries earlier. Gaul was a vast, mysterious wilderness of dark forests, swamps, and fierce warriors. Caesar threw himself into this world with a chaotic energy. He wasn't just a general sitting in a tent at the back of the lines. He marched on foot alongside his legionaries, eating the same rough bread, sleeping on the hard ground under the stars. If a river needed to be crossed, he was often the first to swim across it. His speed was legendary. The Romans called it celeritas, swiftness. He would appear before his enemies, days before they thought it was logistically possible, striking them before they could even form a battle line. He pushed his men to the absolute limit, at one point, to impress the tribes and project total Roman power. His engineers built a massive, sturdy wooden bridge across the wide, churning Rhine River into Germany. They built it in just 10 days. Caesar marched his army across, stayed for 18 days to show the Germanic tribes that Rome could reach them anywhere, and then marched back and dismantled the bridge. It was a terrifying display of engineering and psychological warfare. He even crossed the sea to invade Britain, a place the Romans thought was a mythical island at the edge of the flat earth. But the Gauls were not easily conquered. They found a leader, a young, brilliant chieftain named Vercingetorix. He united the squabbling Gallic tribes and used scorched earth tactics, burning down their own towns and food supplies to starve Caesar's army out. It all culminated at a hilltop fortress called Alesia Vercingetorix, and 80,000 Gauls holed up inside the fortress. Caesar arrived with his legions, but he didn't have enough men to storm the walls, so he did something insane. He built a wall around the entire city, a giant 11-mile ring of fortifications to starve the Gauls out. But then word came. A massive Gallic relief army, 250,000 warriors, was marching to attack Caesar from behind. Caesar was trapped. He was the besieger, but he was about to be besieged. Most generals would have surrendered or retreated. Caesar chose to fight both at once. He ordered his men to build a second wall, facing outward. For days, the Romans fought a desperate, bloody battle on two fronts, trapped inside a donut of their own walls. Through sheer tactical genius, moving from point to point in his iconic red cloak so his men could see him, Caesar broke the Gallic lines. Vercingetorix rode down from the fortress, threw his armor at Caesar's feet, and surrendered. Gaul belonged to Rome. Caesar had conquered hundreds of cities. He had amassed vast fortunes in gold and slaves. He had proven himself to be arguably the greatest general the world had ever seen, but back in Rome, the political landscape had completely changed. Crassus had died in a disastrous military campaign in the east, his throat allegedly poured with molten gold by his captors. The triumvirate was dead, even worse. Caesar's daughter Julia had died in childbirth. The emotional bond tying Pompey to Caesar was shattered. The Senate, terrified of Caesar's growing power, approached Pompey. They flattered him, fed his ego, and convinced him that Caesar was a monster who wanted to destroy the Republic. Pompey sided with the Senate. The stage was set for a civil war. In the winter of 49 BCE, Caesar received an ultimatum from the Senate: dismantle your army, resign your command, and return to Rome as a private citizen to face trial. If you cross the border into Italy with your soldiers, you will be declared an enemy of the state. Caesar stood on the banks of a small, shallow, insignificant river in northern Italy, the Rubicon. To us, it's just a stream, but back then it was a sacred boundary. It was the northern border of Italy proper. Under Roman law, a general bringing an active army across the Rubicon was committing high treason. It was a declaration of war against Rome itself. Caesar paused at the river's edge. He knew the weight of the decision. If he crossed, he would plunge his homeland into a bloody civil war that would cost thousands of lives. If he didn't cross, his enemies would destroy him, strip him of his honors, and exile him into obscurity. He spent hours talking with his closest officers, debating the options, looking down at the moving water. This is the ultimate moment of drama. The quiet before the storm. The man who had conquered Gaul, who had outsmarted pirates, who had rewritten the rules of Roman politics, staring at a stream finally. He made his choice. He turned to his men. He didn't offer a long, grand political speech. He simply quoted a line from a Greek play he loved: "Let the die be cast." He urged his horse forward, splashing through the shallow water of the Rubicon, his battle-hardened 13th Legion marching right behind him. The line had been crossed. There was no turning back. When word reached Rome that Caesar was marching south, panic erupted. The Senate had expected him to hesitate. Pompey, caught completely off guard by Caesar's terrifying speed, realized he didn't have enough troops ready in Italy to face Caesar's veterans. In a move that shocked the city, Pompey, the consuls, and most of the Senate abandoned Rome, fleeing across the sea to Greece to gather their forces. Caesar entered Rome without firing a single arrow or swinging a single sword. The gates were open to him. The city was silent, terrified of what this conqueror would do. They expected a bloodbath, a massacre like previous civil wars. Instead, Caesar showed mercy. He pardoned his political enemies. He protected the citizens. He took control of the treasury and prepared for the final epic showdown with Pompey. This is the story of a man who looked at a crumbling world, refused to be destroyed by it, and instead decided to reshape it in his own image. This was the moment the Roman Republic breathed its final dying gasps, and the shadow of the Roman Empire began to stretch across the world. We return to the streets of Rome, a city resting on a knife edge. The year is 60 before the Common Era. Julius Caesar is no longer just a clever young man who outsmarted pirates. He is a rising political force, but he has reached a dangerous bottleneck. The Roman Senate is a wall of old money and rigid tradition. They look at Caesar with his populist ideas and his immense charm, and they see a threat. They want to stall his career, they want him gone. But Caesar understands something his enemies do not. Rome is no longer ruled by laws, it is ruled by leverage. And so, in the shadows, away from the marble columns of the Forum, Caesar orchestrates a meeting. It is a meeting that will secretly dismantle the Republic. He brings together two men who absolutely despise one another. First, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, perhaps in all of ancient history. Crassus has billions in gold, thousands of slaves, and blocks of real estate, yet he is deeply insecure. He craves military glory. He wants the Senate to respect him the way they respect Rome's great generals, but the Senate treats him like a glorified landlord. Second enters Pompey.
known to the world as Pompey the Great He is Rome's ultimate military champion. He has conquered kingdoms, cleared the seas of danger, and his veterans would follow him into the jaws of death. But Pompey is clumsy in politics. The Senate, terrified of his popularity, has snubbed him. They refuse to give his retired soldiers the small plots of land they were promised for their service.
Pompey is proud, furious, and isolated. Imagine the scene, a candlelit room, Crassus and Pompey sitting on opposite sides, refusing to look each other in the eye, and Caesar standing between them. Caesar does not lecture, he listens. He validates their frustrations. He whispers to Crassus that gold without power is just a target. He whispers to Pompey that a general without political allies is just a retired soldier. Then, he reveals his grand design. He proposes a secret pact. History would later name it the First Triumvirate, the three-headed monster. The terms are simple but devastatingly effective. Crassus will provide the bottomless finances. Pompey will provide the military muscle and the threat of brute force. And Caesar will use their backing to get elected as consul, the highest office in Rome. Once in power, Caesar promises to pass laws that give Pompey his land and give Crassus his financial favors. To seal this alliance, Caesar offers the ultimate Roman political sacrifice. He gives his only daughter, Julia, to be Pompey's wife. Julia is young, beautiful, and intelligent. Pompey is much older, a grizzled warrior, yet against all historical odds, the two fall deeply, passionately in love. The political arrangement becomes a genuine bond of affection, tying the two most powerful men in Rome together through the heart of a young woman. With the wealth of Crassus and the shadow of Pompey's legions behind him, Caesar secures the consulship. The year of his rule is nothing short of a political thunderstorm. If the conservative senators try to veto Caesar's laws, Caesar's street thugs appear. During one famous assembly, a crowd of Caesar's supporters dumps a bucket of feces directly onto the head of his co-consul, Bibulus. Bibulus is so terrified that he retreats to his house for the rest of the year, claiming he is watching the skies for bad omens. Caesar rules Rome completely alone. He passes the land reforms. He bypasses the Senate entirely, taking his laws directly to the people. But Caesar is a realist. He knows that a consul only rules for one single year. The moment his term ends, his political immunity vanishes. His enemies in the Senate are already drafting the paperwork to arrest him, put him on trial, and ruin him forever. He needs a shield. He needs an army. He needs an escape route that will keep him safe for years to come. And so he uses his power to grant himself a 5-year term as the governor of Gaul. The nightmare. In the ancient mind, Gaul, which covers modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany, was a dark, terrifying mystery. It was a land of endless primordial forests, treacherous bogs, and fierce, towering warriors who fought with long swords and wore blue paint. Centuries earlier, Gallic tribes had crossed the Alps, marched into Rome, and burned it to the ground. Every Roman grew up with a deep ancestral fear of the Gauls. To the Roman Senate, sending Caesar to Gaul was a perfect solution. They hoped he would get lost in the forests. They hoped some nameless barbarian chieftain would take his head, ending the Caesar problem forever. They did not understand that they had just given a wolf his hunting ground. When Caesar arrives in Gaul, he does not find a united nation. He finds hundreds of independent tribes, constantly bickering, trading, and waging small wars against each other. Caesar is a master of human psychology. He immediately applies the age-old doctrine, divide and conquer. He presents himself not as an invader, but as a protector. When a massive migration of a tribe called the Helvetii threatens to disrupt the peace, Caesar steps in. He offers protection to weaker tribes, drawing them into alliances, using them for supplies and intelligence, and ruthlessly crushing any tribe that resists. It is here, in the wild woods of the north, that the true legend of Caesar's legions is born. The Roman soldier is a magnificent machine, but Gaul tests them to their absolute limit. They are miles from home, outnumbered in every single conflict, fighting in freezing rains and heavy mud. But Caesar possesses a quality that transforms ordinary men into fanatics. He leads from the front. Caesar does not sit in a golden tent on a hill while his men bleed. He marches on foot through the mud. his bare head exposed to the downpours and the snow. He eats the same hard-tack bread and salted pork as the lowest-ranking legionary. If a line is breaking during a battle, Caesar does not call for a retreat. He snatches a shield from a terrified soldier, runs to the front line, and fights hand-to-hand in the shield wall. He knows his soldiers by name. He calls them his comrades, never his servants. He rewards them with gold from the spoils of war, but more importantly, he rewards them with his absolute loyalty. In return, the men of the 10th, the 8th, and the 12th legions develop a devotion to Caesar that borders on religious worship. They are no longer fighting for the abstract idea of the Roman Republic. They are fighting for Caesar. His speed becomes the stuff of nightmares for his enemies. The Romans call it celeritas. It is a tactical philosophy of pure momentum, while Gallic chieftains are spending weeks gathering their councils and debating strategies. Caesar's legions are marching 30 miles a day through treacherous terrain, appearing like ghosts outside enemy hill forts, before the scouts even know they have crossed the river. To show the world that nothing can hide from the reach of Rome, Caesar decides to cross the Rhine River into Germany, a territory no Roman army had ever dared touch. The Rhine is wide, deep, and fiercely turbulent. The Germanic tribes believe the river is a god that protects them from Rome. Caesar does not build rafts. He orders his engineers to build a massive wooden bridge. The soldiers cut down thousands of trees. They drive heavy oak piles into the riverbed at an angle to withstand the rushing current. They lay down a roadway of timber. They complete this miraculous feat of engineering in just 10 days. Caesar marches his entire army across the Rhine, spends 18 days burning villages and demonstrating absolute dominance to the terrified Germanic tribes, and then marches back into Gaul, dismantling the bridge behind him. He has crossed the boundary of the known world, simply to prove that he could. For years, the conquest seems unstoppable. Caesar sends letters back to Rome detailing his victories. The ordinary people of Rome devour these stories. Caesar is becoming a myth, a living god of war. But Gaul is not a dog that can be easily leashed. The tribes realize that while they have been fighting each other, Caesar has been quietly wrapping a noose around all of their necks. They need a savior, and they find one. His name is Vercingetorix, a young, brilliant nobleman of the Arverni tribe. Unlike the chieftains before him, Vercingetorix understands Roman warfare. He knows that in a straight, open battle, the Roman shield wall and discipline will slaughter his warriors every time. So Vercingetorix changes the rules. He unifies the tribes under a single, desperate strategy. Scorched earth, Vercingetorix orders his people to burn their own lands. They set fire to their own villages, their own fields, their own grain stores. They destroy everything. The goal is simple: starve the Roman war machine. Let the vast wilderness of Gaul swallow Caesar whole. The strategy works beautifully. Caesar's legions find themselves marching through blackened plains and ash-filled valleys, their stomachs rumbling with hunger, harassed by guerrilla warriors who strike from the shadows of the forest and vanish before a javelin can be thrown. The climax of this epic struggle takes place at a massive hilltop fortress called Alesia. Vercingetorix retreats into this heavily fortified city with 80,000 of his best warriors. The fortress sits high on a hill surrounded by steep valleys. It is an impregnable position. Caesar arrives with his legions, looks up at the towering walls, and realizes a frontal assault would be suicide. So Caesar decides to build a cage. He orders his men to dig a massive ditch, 11 miles long, entirely surrounding the mountain. Behind the ditch, they build a 12-foot-high wooden wall with towers every 80 feet. They fill the ground in front of the wall with hidden traps, buried stakes sharpened to a point, iron hooks hidden in the grass to tear open human feet. Caesar intends to starve Vercingetorix out, but as the weeks go on, dire news reaches the Roman camp. Vercingetorix had sent out his cavalry before the walls were finished. He has summoned the rest of Gaul. A massive relief army, over 250,000 Gallic warriors, is marching toward Alesia. Caesar is now caught in the ultimate trap. He is besieging 80,000 men inside the fortress, but 250,000 men are coming to attack him from behind. He is the hammer, but he is about to become the anvil. Most men would have abandoned the siege and run for their lives.
Caesar chooses to do something mad. He orders his men to build a second ring of walls, facing outward, a 14-mile circle of fortifications to protect his rear. The Roman army is now living inside a wooden donut, trapped between two massive enemy forces.
The battle that follows is a chaotic symphony of violence. The outer Gauls charge the Roman walls with ladders and hooks, while Vercingetorix pours out from the fortress to attack the inner walls. The air is thick with arrows, javelins, and the screams of dying men. The Roman lines begin to buckle under the sheer weight of numbers. A critical breach opens on a vulnerable hill. Caesar knows this is the moment. If the wall falls, his life, his legions, and his legacy die in the mud of Gaul. He puts on his iconic bright red cloak, a color every single one of his soldiers recognizes instantly. He rides down into the thickest part of the fighting. His men see the red cloak moving through the dust. They hear his high-pitched, commanding voice shouting encouragement. A surge of adrenaline rushes through the exhausted legions. They throw themselves into the breach with a feral intensity. Caesar dispatches his cavalry in secret to ride around the hill and hit the outer Gallic army from behind. The strategy is a masterstroke. The outer Gallic army breaks and runs. Inside the fortress, Vercingetorix looks out from the towers and sees the banners of his relief army falling into the dirt. He knows it is over. The next morning, the gates of Alesia open. Vercingetorix, dressed in his finest armor, rides down the hill alone. He circles the tribunal where Caesar sits in silence. He dismounts his horse, strips off his armor, throws his sword at Caesar's feet, and sits on the ground waiting for his chains. Gaul has fallen. Caesar has won. But as Caesar looks at the ruined fortress, there is no time to celebrate. Letters arrive from Rome, cold and threatening. During his years in the woods, the world he left behind has collapsed. His daughter Julia has died in childbirth, breaking the emotional bond between Caesar and Pompey. Crassus has been killed in a disastrous campaign in the east. The triumvirate is no more. The Senate has weaponized Pompey's jealousy. They have convinced him that Caesar is a tyrant who must be stopped. The message from the Senate is clear. Disarm your army. Resign your post. Return to Rome as a helpless private citizen to stand trial for your crimes. Caesar stands at the northern border of Italy, by the banks of the Rubicon River. Behind him stand the men who bled for him at Alesia. In front of him lies the road to Rome and the inevitability of civil war. The water of the Rubicon River is cold in the winter of 49 before the Common Era. Julius Caesar has made his choice. The die has been cast. As his horse steps out of the freezing stream and onto the sacred soil of Italy proper, the world changes forever. He has only a single legion with him, the 13th, about 5,000 men. It is a tiny force compared to the massive armies the Roman Senate can theoretically raise across the empire. But Caesar's men are not normal soldiers. They are iron-willed veterans of the Gallic Wars. They are fiercely loyal, and they move with that terrifying trademark celeritas, that lightning-fast speed that has paralyzed Caesar's enemies for a decade. Caesar does not wait. He does not fortify a position. He marches straight down the eastern coast of Italy, sweeping through towns before the local magistrates even receive word that he has crossed the border. In Rome, 40 miles away, panic erupts. The Senate had convinced themselves that Caesar would hesitate. They thought the threat of being declared an enemy of the state would make him beg for a peaceful retirement. They completely miscalculated his resolve. Rumors fly through the crowded marble streets of the capital. The rumors say that Caesar is marching with an army of giant, blue-painted Gallic barbarians who are going to burn Rome to the ground. The wealthy elites, the proud patricians who had spent years plotting Caesar's downfall, suddenly find themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. They turn to Pompey the Great. He is their champion. He is the man who was supposed to protect the Republic, but Pompey is caught completely flat-footed. He tells the Senate the brutal truth. He has plenty of soldiers on paper, but they are scattered across Spain, Greece, and the East. He does not have an army ready in Italy that can stand against Caesar's battle-hardened 13th Legion. In a move that shocks the ancient world, Pompey makes a desperate tactical decision. He orders the total evacuation of Rome. He tells the Senate the consuls, and the wealthy citizens that Italy cannot be held. They must abandon the capital, flee south to the port cities, and cross the sea to Greece. There in the east, Pompey has deep connections, bottomless wealth, and thousands of troops. He intends to build a massive war machine, starve out Italy using his navy, and return to crush Caesar later. Imagine the chaos in the middle of the night. The proudest politicians in human history, packing their gold and family heirlooms into carts, abandoning their sprawling villas and fleeing into the dark. They leave the gates of Rome wide open. When Caesar arrives at the walls of the city, there are no archers on the ramparts. There are no legions blocking the road. The citizens open the gates in total silence, terrified of a massacre. But Caesar surprises everyone. There is no bloodbath, there are no executions. Caesar walks into the empty Senate house, speaks calmly to the citizens who remained, and states that he did not come to destroy the Republic. He came to defend his own honor from a corrupt faction. He takes control of the state treasury, leaves a garrison to keep the peace, and immediately turns his gaze south. He is chasing Pompey. He wants to end this war before it can truly begin. Pompey escapes. By the time Caesar reaches the southern port of Brundisium, Pompey's fleet has already vanished over the horizon, sailing across the Adriatic Sea toward the safety of Greece. Caesar is trapped on the heel of Italy. Pompey controls the entire Mediterranean navy. He has hundreds of warships patrolling the waters, waiting to sink any transport boat Caesar tries to launch. For months, Caesar builds ships, gathers his remaining legions from Gaul, and waits for winter to fall. Most generals in the ancient world never sailed in the winter. The Adriatic Sea during the winter months is a chaotic death trap of violent storms, sudden gales, and zero visibility. Pompey's naval commanders know this, so they slacken their guard, assuming Caesar will wait until spring. They still do not understand the mind of Julius Caesar. In the dead of winter, under the cover of a pitch-black stormy night, Caesar packs 7 of his legions into basic unarmored transport boats. They carry no baggage, no horses, and barely any food. Caesar wants them light, and he wants them fast. They slip through the naval blockade in the dark, tossing violently on the massive freezing waves, and miraculously make landfall on the rocky, cliff-lined coast of Epirus, modern-day Albania. But the victory is short-lived. Caesar is now in Greece, but he is in a deeply precarious position. He only has half his army with him. The other half, led by his trusted general Mark Antony, is still stuck back in Italy, unable to cross because Pompey's navy has finally woken up and blockaded the ports. Caesar is outnumbered, cut off from his supply lines, and trapped against the sea by Pompey's massive, well-fed army. There is a legendary story from this desperate winter that highlights Caesar's almost pathological belief in his own destiny. Anxious for Mark Antony's reinforcements, Caesar decides to secretly cross the stormy sea back to Italy himself, disguised as a slave. He boards a tiny, open fishing boat in the middle of a raging midnight tempest. As the boat hits the mouth of the river, the waves become monstrous. The wind howls, flooding the boat with freezing water. The captain of the vessel, terrified for his life, panics and orders his men to turn back around to the shore. In that moment, Caesar steps out of the shadows. He pulls off his hood, looks the terrified captain directly in the eye, and says, "Fear not, my friend, for you carry Caesar and Caesar's fortune." He truly believed that the universe itself would not allow him to drown because his story was not yet finished. The storm eventually proved too violent even for Caesar's destiny, forcing the small boat back to land, but the message was clear to everyone around him. This was a man who viewed himself as a force of nature. Eventually, Mark Antony manages a daring crossing of his own, breaking through the blockade and joining Caesar. The two halves of the army are united. The stage is set for the final clash between the two titans of Rome. The two armies shadow each other through the rugged mountains of Greece, eventually descending into the wide, sun-drenched plains of Pharsalus. It is the summer of 48, before the Common Era. The contrast between the two camps is stark. Pompey's camp is a festival of luxury.
The wealthy Roman senators who fled with him have set up lavish tents lined with ivy and silver plate. They are already drinking fine wines and arguing over who will get Caesar's property and offices once he is dead. They have over 45,000 infantry and 7,000 elite cavalry. They outnumber Caesar more than 2 to 1. Caesar's camp is silent, austere, and hungry.
His 22,000 men are thin. Their armor is dented and rusted from years in the mud of Gaul, and they have been surviving on wild roots dug out of the soil. Pompey, being a brilliant general, knows he doesn't need to fight. He knows Caesar is starving. His strategy is simple. Sit on the hills, block the roads, and let hunger defeat Caesar for him. But the wealthy senators around Pompey destroy his patience. They call him a coward. They mock him, accusing him of prolonging the war just because he enjoys commanding kings. They pressure him day after day to march down the hill and crush the clown from Gaul in an open battle. Finally, Pompey gives in to the pressure. On a bright, hot morning, Caesar looks across the plain and sees the massive lines of Pompey's army marching down into the valley. Caesar smiles. He has finally gotten the one thing he wanted, an open field. Pompey's battle plan is sound. He identifies Caesar's right flank as the weak point. He places all 7,000 of his elite cavalry on that side. His plan is to use this massive cavalry force to sweep around Caesar's line, attack his veterans from behind, and roll up his entire army in a giant pincer movement. Caesar, standing on a slight hill in his iconic red cloak, watches the enemy formations. He immediately spots Pompey's massive cavalry buildup. He knows his own small cavalry force will be annihilated in seconds. He needs a counter-strategy, and he needs it instantly. Caesar pulls 3,000 of his most trusted veterans out of his main battle line. He forms them into a secret, hidden fourth line, completely obscured behind his cavalry. He gives them a highly unusual, brutal order. He tells them that when Pompey's cavalry charges, they are not to throw their javelins from a distance. Instead, they are to hold their heavy javelins like spears and strike directly at the faces of Pompey's young, wealthy cavalrymen. Caesar knew these aristocratic young horsemen valued their good looks and their vanity above all else. They wouldn't be able to handle the brutal, face-to-face violence of a veteran infantry charge. The trumpets sound. The lines collide with a roar of bronze and iron.
Pompey's 7,000 cavalry charge forward, easily scattering Caesar's small horse units, just as Pompey intended. They begin to wheel around to attack Caesar's flank. Suddenly, Caesar signals his secret fourth line. 3,000 hardened veterans leap out from the dust. They march forward in perfect, terrifying silence, holding their javelins high, thrusting them directly at the eyes and faces of the charging horsemen. The psychological shock is absolute. The young aristocrats panic, unable to face the sheer, unyielding ferocity of Caesar's veterans. Pompey's elite cavalry breaks. They turn their horses around and flee the field in a cloud of dust, abandoning their infantry. Caesar doesn't waste a single heartbeat.
He orders his fresh reserves to charge directly into the exposed flank of Pompey's main foot soldiers. The giant army of the Senate begins to shatter. Pompey, standing at the back, watches his unstoppable cavalry flee. He realizes his line is collapsing. The man who had been called the Great for 30 years experiences a total psychological breakdown. He walks back to his tent in a daze, takes off his general's cloak, mounts a horse and flees the field, abandoning his men, his family, and his cause. Caesar has won the ultimate victory. The army of the Republic is broken, but as Caesar walks among the thousands of fallen Roman citizens on the battlefield, he does not celebrate. He feels a profound, heavy sadness. He looks at the dead senators and soldiers and says softly, "They would have it so. After all my great deeds, I, Gaius Caesar, would have been condemned if I had not sought the help of my army." He issues a strict order to his men: spare any Roman citizen who surrenders. He pardons thousands of Pompey's soldiers, including a young, idealistic senator named Marcus Junius Brutus. But the war is not over. Pompey has fled south across the Mediterranean, heading toward the ancient, golden kingdom of Egypt. And Caesar, ever the hunter, prepares to follow him into the land of the pharaohs, where a completely different kind of trap awaits. We return at last to Rome. The year is 45, before the Common Era. Julius Caesar enters the ancient capital not as a general fighting for his life, but as the absolute, undisputed master of the Mediterranean world. The civil wars are finally over. His enemies have been defeated on battlefield after battlefield, from Greece to Egypt, from Asia Minor to the plains of Spain. The city that once panicked at the mention of his name now showers him with unprecedented honors. The Senate, largely empty of his former rivals and filled with his supporters, votes to give him titles that no Roman had ever held in the 500-year history of the Republic. They name him dictator for 10 years. They changed the name of the traditional birth month of his family, Quintilis, to Julius, the month we still call July to this very day. They allow him to wear the purple robes of the ancient kings and a laurel wreath of victory at all public events. But Caesar does not use this absolute power to exact revenge. Rome remembers previous civil wars as eras of blood, lists of executions, and property stolen by the state. Caesar chooses a different path. He calls his policy clementia, mercy. He issues a blanket pardon to almost every surviving senator who fought against him. He invites his former enemies back into the city, restores their wealth, and even appoints them to high political offices. He throws himself into rebuilding the broken society. He uses his immense wealth to buy land for his loyal veterans, finally fulfilling his promises without stealing from ordinary citizens. He overhauls the corrupt grain distribution system to feed the poor. He even notices that the Roman calendar is completely out of alignment with the seasons due to years of political neglect. Reaching back to the knowledge he gathered in Egypt, he designs a brand new calendar system with 365 days and a leap year, the Julian calendar, the structural foundation of the calendar the world still uses today. To the ordinary people of Rome, Caesar is a savior. He is a champion who looked at their poverty, bypassed the greedy politicians, and actually made their lives better. But in the high society villas of the aristocracy, a dark, toxic resentment is brewing. The traditionalist senators look at Caesar's reforms and they do not see a generous leader. They see a tyrant. They look at his purple robes, his golden chair in the Senate House, and his face minted on Roman coins, and they feel a deep, ancestral horror to a proud Roman patrician. The highest virtue is equality among the elites. The idea that no single man should ever be permanently superior to the rest. By holding absolute power, Caesar is starving them of their own ambition, their own chance at glory. They whisper in the dark, they exchange nervous glances under the marble porticos, and the whispers turn into a conspiracy. The conspiracy finds its architects in two men who represent the deep complexity of Rome, Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. Cassius is a man driven by bitter, burning envy. He is a brilliant soldier who fought against Caesar, was pardoned, but could never stomach the idea of living in another man's shadow. But Brutus is different. Brutus is driven by a tragic, crushing sense of historical duty. Marcus Junius Brutus is an idealist, a philosopher, and a man Caesar loved almost like a son. Rumors even whispered that Brutus might have been Caesar's biological child from an old affair. Caesar had protected Brutus at Pharsalus, pardoned him, treated him with immense tenderness, and elevated him to one of the highest governorships in the empire. But Brutus carried a heavy curse. His ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, was the legendary hero who had banished the last king of Rome 5 centuries earlier and founded the Republic. Cassius and the other conspirators exploit this psychological pressure. They leave anonymous notes on Brutus's judicial bench. They write on the statues of his famous ancestor, "Brutus, are you dead? Your descendants are not worthy of you." They convince the conflicted young man that Caesar's mercy is just a golden chain, and that true patriotism requires sacrificing his personal love for Caesar to save the abstract idea of Roman liberty. Over 60 senators join the plot, calling themselves the Liberators. As the winter of 44 BCE turns to spring, the tension in Rome becomes palpable. Ancient historians recorded a cascade of strange omens and warnings, as if the universe itself was trying to stop what was coming. A famous fortune teller, a soothsayer named Spurina, approaches Caesar in the crowded streets. He looks into the dictator's eyes and issues a cryptic, chilling warning: beware the Ides of March. The Ides was simply the Roman term for the midpoint of the month, the 15th of March. Caesar, ever the rationalist, smiles and brushes the warning aside. On the night of March 14th,
Caesar is staying at the villa of his wife Calpurnia. A violent storm rages over Rome, shaking the wooden shutters of the bedroom. Calpurnia experiences a horrific, vivid nightmare.
She dreams that the front pediment of their house is collapsing and that she is holding Caesar's blood-soaked body in her arms, weeping. When the sun rises on the morning of March 15th, Calpurnia wakes up in terror. She begs Caesar on her knees not to go to the Senate meeting that day. Caesar, who had been feeling unwell and was deeply affected by his wife's genuine panic, decides to yield to her wishes. He prepares to send a messenger to postpone the meeting, but the conspirators are waiting. One of the plotters, Decimus Brutus, another man Caesar trusted completely, arrives at the house. He laughs off Calpurnia's dreams. Tells Caesar that the Senate is waiting to vote on a massive military command for him, and asks if the great Julius Caesar is really going to stay home just because of a woman's nightmare. Caesar looks at his friend, sighs, and changes his mind. He steps out of his door and walks into the warm morning air of Rome. The Senate is meeting at the Theater of Pompey, a massive marble complex built by Caesar's late rival. As Caesar walks through the crowds outside the theater, he spots the soothsayer, Spurina, in the press of people. Caesar looks at him with a light, confident smile and says softly, "The Ides of March have come." Spurina looks back at him with a somber, unblinking gaze and whispers, "Yes, Caesar, but they are not yet gone." Another man tries to press a small rolled scroll into Caesar's hand. It is a letter written by a teacher who had discovered the conspiracy, detailing every single name of the men waiting inside. But the crowds are too thick, and Caesar, thinking it is just another standard citizen petition, holds the scroll in his hand without reading it. He walks up the stone steps and steps through the grand archway into the Senate chamber. As Caesar takes his seat on his golden chair, the conspirators gather around him like a pack of wolves. To avoid suspicion, they pretend to present a petition begging for the recall of a senator's exiled brother. Caesar declines the request, waving his hand politely, telling them they must wait for the proper legal channels. Suddenly, one of the men, Tullius Cimber, reaches forward and violently tears the purple robe down from Caesar's shoulders. It is the signal. Caesar shouts, "Why, this is violence!" From behind him, a senator named Casca draws a sharp dagger from beneath his toga and drives it towards Caesar's neck. The blade slips, grazing his shoulder. Caesar leaps up, his massive physical reflexes from decades of war kicking in. He grabs Casca's arm and stabs it with his iron stylus, crying out, but then the rest of the 60 conspirators draw their blades. The air is filled with the flash of steel and the sound of fabric tearing. Caesar fights back like a cornered lion, using his bare hands, trying to break through the circle of men. He looks around the ring of faces, searching for help, searching for a loyal guard. And then his eyes lock onto Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus stands in the circle, his face pale, holding a bloody dagger. When Caesar sees the young man he loved, the man he pardoned, the man he treated like a son, standing among his killers, the will to fight completely drains out of him. The psychological betrayal hurts deeper than any blade. He stops fighting, he stops speaking. According to the ancient accounts, he simply pulls the top of his purple toga up over his face, hiding his eyes from the world, so his enemies cannot see him die. He slumps against the pedestal of a giant marble statue of Pompey the Great. The conspirators rush in, striking so wildly in their frenzy that they accidentally cut each other's hands. Caesar is stabbed 23 times. He falls to the marble floor in total silence. The conspirators lift their bloody daggers into the air, shouting about liberty and freedom, expecting the Senate to cheer. Instead, the remaining hundreds of senators scream in horror and flee out into the streets, triggering a wild stampede. Within minutes, the great theater is completely empty. The shouting fades into the distance. Julius Caesar lies alone on the floor at the foot of his old rival's statue, his crimson robe pooling around him. The conspirators thought that by killing the man, they could save the old republic. They thought history could be turned backward, but they were entirely wrong. Caesar's death did not restore the old world. It shattered it forever. His passing would ignite an even bloodier civil war, out of which his adopted son, Augustus, would rise to become the very first emperor of Rome. The Republic was dead, The age of the emperors had begun, but here in the quiet hall the storm has passed. The burning ambition, the lightning-fast marches through the forests of Gaul, the brilliant strategies on the sunlit plains, and the candlelit nights along the Nile, all of it fades into the quiet, echoing memory of time. The die had been cast, the game had been played, and the master of Rome was now a legend, drifting peacefully into the timeless currents of human history.